Reverend Rod. And Reverend Rod has a very important question he needs to ask somebody from the television industry. So I went right to the source and came to our friend at WBT. And he's right in this office. And we're going to go in just a minute and ask this friend a little bit about his life, his ministry. And then before we leave, I want Campbell to remind me to ask the burning question that I always have. Let's go inside here. WBT is their bureau here on in Salisbury on Main Street. And he's waiting for us. David Wisnett.
Hey, Rod.
Thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
Today. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to wave if that's
Okay.
all right.
Look back at you. Let's see if we can do that.
There we go. Okay, listen. I have a burning question for you, but I don't want to ask that until I find out a little bit about what you do here.
Okay.
And how long have you been doing what you do here?
I've been doing this for 28 years in the same office, and this is WBTV, of course, a TV station in Charlotte. It was the first TV station in the Carolinas, and I started working here 28 years ago.
Now, you probably learned some of the guys that we grew up with in
Yes.
Charlotte. Big
Yeah.
Bill Ward, Fred Kirby,
Yeah.
all those guys.
Yeah, Clyde McLean,
Oh, yes,
Ty Boyd,
uh-huh.
everybody talks
Ty
about
Boyd.
those guys.
Yes.
Doug Mays.
Oh gosh, yeah. So you knew all those.
But Fred Kirby that was my main guy.
Fred was a great guy. We saw him at Tweetsy and
Yep, that's it.
everywhere around.
Yep.
How we love the little rascals,
Little rascals.
But let's find out a little bit about what you do here. Can
Sure.
we go in the back
Yeah,
and see?
Come on. It's a little darker back here. Yeah,
Okay.
come back here.
That's great. Tell
Well-
us what you have back here, what you work with.
I used to work with all of this. When they first put this bureau here, it was in 1991, and they had to use all this equipment. And in fact, I can show you that when I first started reporting the news, we started out with a tape that was this size that went in that machine down
It's
the
like
bottom.
that's like a VHS.
Well, you're close.
Okay.
Then we went to this, which is a beta, which is
Okay.
a little bit smaller, and
Uh-huh.
that uses those two.
Okay. All right. So a little bit
Then-
smaller there.
Then we got smaller yet, and this is like a little cassette tape, and it goes in this machine.
Oh,
So look at that
I
size.
see a theme that's going
Do
here. Yes.
Well, then we went
smaller?
to this that doesn't have
Oh.
any tape. It's just a card, a memory card, and that goes in, well, it's here somewhere.
Okay.
Some little thing.
All right. Now this is like an SD card.
Yeah,
Okay.
a little
All
bit
right.
bigger.
Look at
And
that.
now, this is what we use.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see. Well,
So-
it certainly has progressed over
has.
time to just use the tools that you use. Now, I see you on the television. You do all sorts of stories, don't you?
Yes, all kinds.
You do stories about local interest.
Yes.
But you also cover some pretty difficult things.
Yes, I have to
Uh-huh.
cover some difficult stories. Sometimes there are crime stories, or there are stories where bad things have happened in our community, and I have to cover those. And I don't just cover Rowan County, I go wherever the station sends me. And so that can be in Charlotte or Concord or Statesville or anywhere.
Or if there's a storm, you might go
If there's a storm,
further
good
away.
point.
I remember those
Yes,
times.
yes, I've had to cover hurricanes.
Okay, exactly. Well, we don't want you to go anywhere this week.
I don't
down
either.
south.
No.
All right. Well, and I think, the kids are watching, and not a few adults, by the way, we found out. And what we want to do in these segments is ask you just a little bit about how is your work a ministry? Because you're in some pretty difficult times, some difficult places, at times when people need a hopeful word. How's your job a ministry?
Well, it's just what you said. A lot of times I have to cover very bad things, and sometimes I have to cover events where people are at the worst moment in their lives. They may have just lost a loved one, they may have just lost a home, anything. And often those are people I talk to. And it's not always that we interview them for the news. We do if they want to. But a lot of time it's what happens off camera. And that is that you speak with people and you try to tell them that, even without the camera, you have an opportunity to let them know that they're loved and that life is going to go on, and you can tell them positive things and you can try to introduce God. Most folks in that situation, they're already sort of talking to God. What I've found is that they're doing that, and they like to have someone who might come along and help. And I've prayed with people in situations like that, and I used to have a thing, and I still do it. I don't have the tape around here, but I had what I call the yellow tape prayer. And that is, if you ever go to like a scene where there's been a crime or there's been a disaster, you'll see yellow tape
Police tape.
that the police put up. And if you're a reporter, you can walk right up to that tape, but you never go on the other side of it. So a lot of times, while I'm working on my story, I'll walk up to the tape and I'll just stand there and pray myself to God for that situation. And I might pray for the police officers or the firefighters, but certainly for the people that are affected. And I just feel like that's why, I feel like that's one of the reasons God sort of opened up this job for me 28 years ago, was I think He wanted me to do that.
Because you started out on the radio here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So all this time, it's interesting. People see you and they see you with the camera and they see you on television, but they don't really know a lot of things that go on behind the
Right.
scenes that you do. You're
Right.
praying,
Right.
you're talking to people a little bit longer than what we see, the little clips and the little things that we see on television.
That's a good point,
Concern.
because the average story that we do on TV is a minute and a half or 2 minutes long. But I may be at a place for 5, 6, 7 hours or longer. What you see on television is just that 2 minutes. And so, yeah, I got to be doing something the rest of that time. And you try to make it something that's productive, along with doing the interviews and getting the pictures you need to tell a TV story. There's the interactions you have with the people.
What a time of ministry that can really be.
It can
and
be.
that really happens sometimes. I know sometimes you get people at their worst, and I'm sure when they're talking to God, they're saying, "Why, God, did this happen to me?" I hope you've got a good answer for that, by the way. That's it.
I can't tell you that I do. I can't say that I have a good answer. I can say that I know that there are times when God leads me to provide an answer. And if I can provide God's answer, then that is the best answer I can give. There are times when I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for terrible, awful things that happen sometimes. I can't logically just say, this happened because of this. But that's where faith comes in, and faith comes in and tells you that God has a bigger plan. God has a better plan. That there's something, there's something else to this. It's not just this thing, this day, this moment.
I think that's exactly what God does. He says it's not just this time. Think of the larger picture, the longer look at what happens to us. Because even throughout the Bible, as you well know, because I know you're also a Sunday school teacher, that God can sometimes take a difficult situation and turn it to good. He does that all the time. Bad things happen in our world, and sometimes it helps those of us who see those stories think a little bit deeper about life and maybe love people a little bit more while we have them. So I appreciate that. Now, I mentioned something about that what we see on the television is just a small part of what you do. Tell us what you do around the church.
Around the church? Well, as you mentioned, I have a Sunday school class, or I used to. Hopefully I'll have a Sunday school class again at some point. And I've been a deacon in the past and served on just various committees.
You served on an important committee just recently, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell us what you did on that committee.
I was on the pastor search committee, and there were 5, 6 of us on the committee, and we were given the responsibility of discerning who God had already chosen to become the next pastor for First Baptist Church. And so that was something that we went through a process of more than a year of trying to hear what God was telling us. And I feel like we did. I felt like we heard God's call when we ran into Darren Lambert and eventually called him to our church.
Now, it's interesting. Most people think that committees like that go out looking for a preacher. But you all looked at it a little bit differently. You went out looking for who God had already asked and prepared his heart. So that's an interesting way to do that. How do you think it went so far?
So far, so good. We'll have to see. We're in the honeymoon period, right?
That's right, yeah. Well, you all have trained me for 17 years. It's good that you're training.
You're still in the honeymoon period.
I really am because of what we do here, and this is just a great thing. Now, you've been a deacon. You are sort of the voice of the community, and I think a lot of people turn to you to have that sense of the moral voice, the moral compass of the community, and that's a heavy
scary
responsibility. It really is, but I think you live up to it well from the word on the street. Now, I know something that is painful for both of us because we share it. That's people in our lives who've chosen to take their own life, and you're a spokesman for that. I know that's a very painful thing that you and I share.
Yes.
But even in those moments, we try to look beyond that and say, what does God want us to do with this information? How does
When
God want to do it?
you know, if I talk to people and they're at the worst moment in their lives, I try to think about what was the worst moment of my life and does it relate in some way? And that, for me, was the worst moment of my life. And so if I try to look at that and say, what's come out of that since then that's been positive? What have been some of the blessings that have come as a result of that? And how do I use that to keep other people from going through that worst moment of their lives? And I feel like that's something God has told me to do. I just feel without question. If we say we looked for the pastor that God had already chosen, I guess in my case, I looked for the ministry that God had already chosen, and that's been it. And it took a long time for that to be a realization. It took more than 20 years for me to talk about it. But once I did, okay.
And I've heard you say that that's really a mission or a calling. It's an interesting word to use for that because in Latin, that means voice.
Yes, exactly.
That gives you a voice. So it's interesting, and I think what we learned already today from you is that we don't have to go around looking for God, what God wants us to do. It's right there.
Yeah.
All we have to do is open our hearts and open our mind and just see what's going on in our life.
You have to recognize it. But I think you're right. I think it is already there, but you do have to be open to seeing it. And we can be, it's the same thing. If you're in a pastor search committee, you've got to be very open-minded. You've got to be open to listen to God's will and not, I don't like what he's wearing, so I don't want him. You know what I mean? You can't look at those things. You have to hear God's voice.
God looks on the inside and
Yeah.
he sees the future and what might happen if
Right.
this person comes. So that's
Right.
a lot of responsibility. So you carry a lot of responsibility, but you don't bear this responsibility by yourself. Camera person, if you just come over here and take a picture of that part of his office right there. I see your strength right here, and I see the
Well-
people that you pray for. Tell us about these folks.
Well, obviously, the lovely wife, the granddaughters, that I'm very proud of, and that's it. I mean, that's my little earthly family, and my brother that I miss very much, and he passed away a few years ago. But yeah, that's obviously the most important part of my desk, and so
Yeah. Being a husband is one thing, and a father, but that grandparent stuff, that's pretty good stuff.
that's pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty hard to beat.
Yeah,
Must admit.
and that's the reason why we do a lot of what we do is our grandchildren.
Yes.
Because we want to make sure it's a better world for those people
Yes.
that come in.
Yeah. And so Ava, Maisie, if you're watching, see, yeah, talking about you and
Yes.
all the rest of you too, not just mine.
Exactly. Well, and as we've talked about your family here, we know that you do a lot for the community. You do a lot in the church. What we do on Where in the World's Reverend Rod is each week we try to have a prayer for you and your family. Could you tell us maybe what we can pray for you all, just as a family, as a person?
I would say I would really appreciate prayers for me on the job. Because of the pandemic, because of other things, this has been the most difficult year I've had. This has been the hardest year I've done news in 28 years, by far. And being able to have a servant's heart that is more, I don't know the word, I just pray that I can put up with things better than I do. I'm not saying it properly. I need a thicker skin.
Yes, I think
That's
you
all I'm
said it
saying.
realistically because it's a time when it's not like a time that I've ever lived through. This has been the toughest time in my ministry too,
Yeah.
because there's so much unknown, and people say, "Give me something to hold on to," and all we can say is, "The one in charge." We
The
don't
one in
know.
charge.
Yeah.
And pray for, family situations would be like school, for example. When my granddaughters were excited about going back to school and now they're not, because it'll be online. For parents who are having to make decisions when it comes to childcare and different things like that, they're having to make really hard decisions. So there's a lot. And, I ask for prayer for my son because he will be one of the administrators in the virtual academy.
That's exactly
See?
right.
So it's all uncharted territory.
How many kids in the virtual academy?
3,000, more or less.
3,000. That is the largest school in the
Very good.
county.
Yes, it doesn't even have a football team.
I remember, well, it's got a mascot, doesn't it now?
Very good.
I remember the day that it was 2,000.
Yes.
And then they extended it one day, and 1,000
Got more.
people came on. And the domino effect, because as more people go to that academy, it affects those teachers who are in the classroom.
Right.
So it's just no end to how much this affects everybody, and everybody is touched by that. And we certainly will pray for you all about that. Now, if anybody else, if any of the kids out there, or really any of the young people, would like to go into this line of work as a ministry.
No.
All right.
Sorry. I'm just kidding. I'm just
All
kidding.
right. Yeah, we'll call WBT just a little bit. Talk to your boss about that. But if they would like to go into this this type of business, this type of ministry, what do you think the first step would be?
The first step would be to become a news junkie. And I know that probably sounds difficult, but in other words, pay attention to news. Pay attention to local news and pay attention to the newspaper or the radio or your local station or what you see online. And I would say to do that, if you're looking to go into this, stick with established organizations just to at least understand how it works. If you want to do news, that's kind of what you want to do. If you want to do opinion and commentary, that's a different thing. I do news.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where you have to kind of understand being able to be accurate and to be fair and to tell two sides, because every story does have two sides. And you have to be open and understand that. So look for the other side of a story and pay attention to local news.
And to do that all in a minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
That's a tough
To
thing.
boil it down.
Exactly, exactly. A lot of us are good with words and things like
Yes.
that, but be able to condense it down so to be
And
clear,
without losing the actual message.
clear, concise, compassionate. I like those
Yeah.
kind of things. I can remember those kind of things. I appreciate that. Well, I came in here with a burning question, David. I want to ask you.
You didn't
this
ask that
burning
yet?
question. Not yet.
Oh,
But
okay.
I wanted to wait to the very end. When I see newscasters on television and they have their suits on, they have their coats on, things like that, do they have pants on?
Most of the time. Most of the time. There are times when they wear shorts like I'm wearing today.
Did you see that?
That is, we do that.
Okay.
But now, honestly, the way that studios have changed, you don't sit the whole time. There's a lot of this like moving around to a screen, pointing out things and going over here and moving. So you can't get away with shorts like you used to. And you can't do the thing. They used to take the suit jacket and tuck it in back here so that it would stay exact.
Right.
It would be tight. And they don't really do that anymore because you have to move.
The reason I ask that is because a lot of people on Zoom meetings forget
Oh.
that
Well, yeah.
we can see behind them, and
That's
sometimes they stand up.
That's right.
So they need to understand they probably need to wear pants and be dressed up for those kind of things,
Yes.
because we are zooming all over the country
Yes,
these
we are.
days with the I know, from the church and things like that. So I figured I'd ask a professional.
That's a
about
good
this.
point.
Well, that's what
That's
I
a very
have.
good point.
All right.
So the answer is sometimes.
Sometimes, okay.
Yes.
Well, listen, we appreciate what you do. We appreciate the fact that you tell us what's going on in the community, but you tell us with a heart, and that's important to us.
Thank you.
So, and thank you for being here today. This is Where in the World is Reverend Rod, and we will see you next Tuesday at 2 o'clock for 20 minutes. See you later.